Do you remember your grandmother's kitchen on winter mornings? Steam rising from a pot, her hands stirring something thick and bubbling?
I used to wake before the sun, the kitchen still cold, the pot already warming.
The smell of cooking grain filled the house. In 1950s, 30 hot cereals appeared on breakfast tables. By 1970, families made 10. Today, most make one, instant oatmeal. Number 8 called kasha in Russian. Tonight, we are bringing them back. All 30 before the last generation who made them dies. Your grandmother would measure steel-cut oats into a heavy pot with cold water, add a pinch of salt, and set it on the stove to simmer for 40 minutes while she prepared the rest of breakfast. The oats would cook slowly, absorbing water and softening into thick porridge that stuck to your ribs until lunchtime. Steel-cut oats cost less than rolled oats because they required less processing. They were just whole oat groats, chopped into pieces with steel blades. The cereal had to be stirred every 10 minutes to prevent sticking and burning on the pot bottom. When the porridge was done, grandmother would ladle it into bowls and top each serving with a pat of butter that melted into golden pools. The salt brought out the oat's natural sweetness without adding sugar. That steel-cut porridge wasn't just breakfast. It was fuel for manual labor, the kind of food that kept farmers and factory workers going through morning shifts. Every box of cream of wheat came with specific instructions that grandmothers followed exactly. Bring milk to a boil, add the wheat gradually while stirring constantly, cook for 2.5 minutes. The cereal would thicken dramatically, transforming from grainy powder to smooth, creamy porridge. The brown sugar swirl was the best part. Grandmother would sprinkle brown sugar on top of the hot cereal in a spiral pattern, and you'd eat from the outside in, getting different amounts of sweetness with each spoonful. The cereal cost about 15 cents per box and made 8 servings, making it economical for large families. Children who complained about plain cereal would eat cream of wheat happily because of the sugar decoration. That cream of wheat wasn't just hot cereal. It was one of the few breakfast foods children actually looked forward to eating on cold mornings. Your grandmother would cook cornmeal with water and salt until it became thick mush, then pour it into a loaf pan and refrigerate it overnight. In the morning, she'd slice the solidified mush into half-inch slices and fry them in bacon grease, left over from yesterday's breakfast. The fried mush slices would develop crispy golden crusts while staying soft and creamy inside. Families would eat them with butter and maple syrup or with eggs and bacon for a complete breakfast. This cereal used the cheapest grain available. Cornmeal cost pennies per pound, and transformed it into something that tasted rich and special because of the bacon grease frying. Your grandmother would soak pearl barley overnight in cold water, then drain it in the morning and cook it with fresh water for 30 minutes. The barley would soften into chewy, satisfying porridge with more texture than oatmeal. When the barley was cooked, she'd drizzle dark molasses over each serving. The molasses added iron and deep, complex sweetness that white sugar couldn't match. The combination of nutty barley and rich molasses created flavor that tasted almost like dessert. Barley was cheaper than wheat in some regions, especially where barley grew well locally. Farina was wheat cereal ground finer than cream of wheat, creating porridge so smooth it was almost like pudding. Your grandmother would cook it in milk instead of water, making it extra creamy and rich. The cereal cooked in just 5 minutes, making it faster than most hot cereals. When it was done, she'd stir in butter and honey, creating golden, sweet breakfast that children loved. Farina cost slightly more than cornmeal, but less than oatmeal, positioning it as middle-range cereal that families could afford regularly. The smooth texture appealed to young children who rejected chunkier cereals. Re-hook. Look at what we've learned so far. Every single cereal required real work. standing, stirring, watching the pot. Your grandmother knew exactly when rye was done just by looking at it, could tell if buckwheat was toasted enough by the smell alone. She ground rice by hand, browned butter without burning it, soaked grains overnight without forgetting them in the morning. 25 more cereals show how deep this knowledge went. Cracked rye was whole, rye kernels broken into small pieces, creating cereal with substantial texture and distinctive flavor. Your grandmother would cook it for 25 minutes, stirring occasionally while it absorbed water and softened. During the last 10 minutes of cooking, she'd add chopped dried apricots that would plump up and distribute their sweet tart flavor throughout the cereal. The apricots turned the plain brown cereal into something colorful and fruity. Cracked rye cost less than rolled wheat because it required less processing, just cracking the kernels. The cereal provided more fiber than processed wheat cereals, keeping digestive systems healthy. The dried apricots were expensive compared to raisins, so this cereal appeared less frequently. Your grandmother would grind white rice in a hand-cranked grain mill until it became fine powder, then cook the rice powder with milk, creating smooth white cereal that tasted delicate and mild. The grinding took 10 minutes of arm work, but the resulting cereal was special. She'd add vanilla extract and white sugar during cooking, flavoring the cereal so it tasted like rice pudding. The vanilla scent would fill the kitchen, announcing that breakfast would be sweet and comforting. Rice cream was easier to digest than wheat cereals, making it ideal for young children, elderly family members, or anyone with stomach troubles. The mild flavor didn't upset sensitive digestive systems. The cereal had to be stirred constantly during cooking to prevent lumps from forming. Buckwheat groats, called kasha in Russian and Jewish households, would be toasted in a dry skillet until they smelled nutty and turned darker brown, then cooked with water until tender. Your grandmother would serve the cooked groats in bowls with butter melting on top and cold milk poured around the edges. The toasting step was essential. Raw buckwheat tasted grassy and bitter, but toasted buckwheat developed deep, complex flavors that some people compared to coffee. The toasting took only 5 minutes, but transformed the cereal completely. Buckwheat wasn't actually wheat. It was seed from a plant related to rhubarb. This meant people who couldn't eat wheat could eat buckwheat safely. The cereal had strong, distinctive flavor that people either loved or hated. Children often rejected it at first, but learned to love it after repeated exposure. Millet was tiny, round, yellow grain that most Americans had never heard of until Betty Crocker introduced it in the late 1950s. Your grandmother would rinse the millet, toast it briefly in a dry pot, then cook it with water for 25 minutes until the grains were tender and fluffy. While the millet cooked, she'd brown butter in a small skillet, heating it until the milk solids turned golden and the butter developed rich, nutty aroma. When the millet was done, she'd pour the brown butter over each serving and drizzle honey on top. Millet was cheaper than wheat in some markets because it grew easily in poor soil and dry conditions. The grain stored well, staying fresh for months without refrigeration. The texture was different from other cereals. Sorghum was round grain similar to millet, but larger and with chewier texture. Your grandmother would soak the whole grains overnight in cold water, then cook them for 45 minutes in the morning, creating cereal with substantial bite and mild, slightly sweet flavor. The long cooking time meant this cereal appeared only on weekends or during school vacations when there was time for extended preparation. The sorghum had to be watched carefully and stirred frequently to prevent sticking. When the grains were finally tender, grandmother would pour real maple syrup over them, not the cheap pancake syrup, but actual maple syrup that cost significantly more but tasted incomparably better. The cereal was extremely filling. One bowl would keep you satisfied for hours because the whole grains took longer to digest than processed cereals. Some grandmothers would cook large batches on Sunday and reheat portions throughout the week, adding water or milk to thin the porridge that had thickened during storage. Rehook 10 cereals down: steel-cut oats, cream of wheat, cornmeal, barley, farina, rye, rice, buckwheat, millet, sorghum. Your grandmother moved between them effortlessly, knowing which pot worked best for each grain, which spoon prevented sticking, how high to set the flame. She never measured water. She just knew. Her hands remembered what her mind didn't need to think about. 20 cereals left to document. Teff was tiny grain from Ethiopia, smaller even than millet. Your grandmother would cook it with water for 20 minutes, stirring constantly because the tiny grains had tendency to clump together. While the teff cooked, she'd prepare spiced butter by melting butter with cardamom, cinnamon, and a pinch of cloves. This fragrant butter would be spooned over the finished cereal, adding warmth and complexity. The cooked teff had unique texture. It became thick and porridge-like, but retained slight graininess that gave it character. The flavor was mild and slightly nutty, similar to wheat, but with earthier undertones. Teff was expensive and hard to find. Only specialty health food stores carried it. Most families who tried teff made it once as novelty, then returned to more familiar grains. The spiced butter was essential for making the cereal appealing. Amaranth was ancient grain from Central America, with tiny seeds that looked almost like sand. Your grandmother would cook it with water for 25 minutes, stirring constantly because it had tendency to stick and burn. The cooked amaranth would become thick and porridge-like, with texture similar to cream of wheat, but with slightly nutty flavor. She'd stir in cinnamon during the last few minutes of cooking, then pour evaporated milk over each serving. The evaporated milk was key. It was thicker and richer than regular milk, with concentrated flavor. The milk would pool at the bottom of the bowl, and you'd stir it up through the cereal as you ate. Amaranth provided complete protein, making it valuable for families who couldn't afford meat at every meal. Betty Crocker emphasized this nutritional benefit heavily. The grain was expensive and hard to find. Only specialty health food stores carried it. Most families who tried amaranth made it once as novelty. The texture was controversial. Some people loved the thick, smooth porridge, while others found it gluey and unpleasant. That amaranth cereal wasn't just trying new grains. It was Betty Crocker's attempt to demonstrate that she was constantly researching and discovering better options for family nutrition. Quinoa was ancient grain from South America that most Americans had never heard of until the late 1950s. Your grandmother would rinse it thoroughly to remove the bitter coating, then cook it with milk for 20 minutes. The quinoa would become translucent and tender, with tiny spiral tails visible on each grain. She'd stir in honey and chopped dried cherries during the last 5 minutes, creating sweet cereal that looked exotic. The complete protein content made quinoa valuable for families who couldn't afford meat at every meal. The grain provided all essential amino acids that human bodies needed. The cereal was expensive compared to wheat and oats because quinoa had to be imported from South America. Most families reserved it for special occasions. The texture was unique. The grains stayed separate and slightly crunchy even when fully cooked. Some people loved this texture, while others found it strange. Spelt was ancient wheat variety that had been grown for thousands of years. Your grandmother would soak the whole spelt berries overnight, then cook them for 90 minutes in the morning until they became tender and chewy. During the last 10 minutes of cooking, she'd add chopped dates and walnuts, letting them warm through and soften slightly. The dates would release their caramel-like sweetness throughout the cereal. Spelt berries looked similar to wheat berries, but were slightly larger and had nuttier flavor. The long cooking time meant this cereal appeared only on special occasions. The cereal was filling and nutritious. Spelt provided more protein than modern wheat varieties and was easier for some people to digest. The dates and walnuts were expensive additions that made this cereal special occasion food rather than everyday breakfast. Some grandmothers would cook large batches and freeze portions, reheating them throughout the month. That spelt berry cereal wasn't just trying old grains, it was recognizing that ancient varieties sometimes offered benefits that modern grains had lost through selective breeding. Wild rice wasn't actually rice, it was seed from aquatic grass that grew in lakes and rivers in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Your grandmother would cook it with water for 45 minutes until the grains burst open and became tender. During the last 10 minutes of cooking, she'd add dried cranberries and chopped pecans, creating cereal that tasted like Thanksgiving in a bowl. Wild rice was expensive. It cost 3 to 4 times as much as regular rice because it had to be hand-harvested from boats in shallow lakes. This made it special occasion cereal. The flavor was distinctive, earthy and nutty with slightly chewy texture even when fully cooked. Some family members loved it, while others found it too strong. Native American tribes in the Great Lakes region had been eating wild rice for thousands of years, and Betty Crocker marketed it as authentic American food. Some families would serve this cereal only during fall and winter, when cranberries and pecans were in season. That wild rice cereal wasn't just breakfast. It was connection to American history, recognition that indigenous peoples had been eating nutritious foods long before Europeans arrived. 15 cereals, 15 completely different grains. Think about that for a moment. Your grandmother could walk into any kitchen and make breakfast from Teff, Amaranth, quinoa, spelt, or wild rice without consulting a single recipe. She knew cooking times by heart, understood which grains needed soaking and which didn't, could adjust heat and water by instinct. That knowledge is gone now. Triticale was hybrid grain created by crossing wheat and rye, combining the best qualities of both parent grains. Your grandmother would cook the rolled triticale flakes with water for 15 minutes, creating porridge that had wheat's mildness and rye's distinctive flavor. She'd serve it with blackstrap molasses, the darkest, strongest molasses available, left over after sugar refining had extracted all possible sugar. Blackstrap molasses tasted bitter and intense. The molasses provided iron and other minerals, making this cereal particularly valuable for people with anemia. Doctors would sometimes recommend it specifically for pregnant women or growing children who needed extra iron. The flavor combination was challenging. The bitter molasses and the distinctive triticale created taste that required acquired taste to appreciate. Triticale was relatively new grain in the 1950s. Scientists had only recently succeeded in creating stable hybrid. Betty Crocker promoted it as modern scientific achievement. The cereal stuck with you for hours, providing sustained energy. The combination of wheat and rye proteins created more complete nutrition than either grain alone. That Triticale cereal wasn't just trying new grains, it was embracing agricultural science, believing that human ingenuity could create better foods than nature had provided. Bulgur was wheat that had been parboiled, dried, and cracked into small pieces, creating grain that cooked faster than regular cracked wheat. Your grandmother would cook it with water for 15 minutes, then drizzle date syrup over each serving. The date syrup was thick, dark sweetener made by boiling dates until they released their sugars, then straining out the solids. It had caramel-like flavor that was richer than honey. Bulgur was Middle Eastern grain that became available in American stores during the 1950s as international foods became more popular. Betty Crocker promoted it as exotic alternative to oatmeal. The cereal cooked much faster than whole wheat berries while providing similar nutrition. The parboiling process made its nutrients more available for absorption. The date syrup was expensive and time-consuming to make. You needed a pound of dates to make half a cup of syrup. Some families would make this cereal only for special occasions because date syrup was expensive. That Bulgur cereal wasn't just trying international foods, it was expanding American breakfast beyond traditional grains, introducing flavors from other cultures. Job's tears were grain-like seeds from tropical grass plant, larger than barley, and with hard, bead-like exterior. Your grandmother would soak them overnight in cold water, then cook them for 90 minutes in the morning until they became tender and chewy. She'd serve them with palm sugar syrup made by dissolving shaved palm sugar in hot water, and with coconut cream spooned on top. The palm sugar added caramel-like sweetness, while the coconut cream contributed rich, tropical flavor. Job's tears were traditional food in parts of Asia, where they'd been eaten for thousands of years. Betty Crocker introduced them to American markets as exotic breakfast option. The seeds were extremely hard to find. Only Asian grocery stores carried them. Most American families never encountered Job's tears. The long cooking time and unusual ingredients made this cereal impractical for daily breakfast. The coconut cream had to be skimmed from the top of canned coconut milk after it had been refrigerated overnight. That Job's Tears cereal wasn't just breakfast, it was culinary adventure, exploration of food traditions from cultures that most Americans knew nothing about. Freekeh was young green wheat that had been roasted and cracked, creating grain with smoky flavor and chewy texture. Your grandmother would cook it with water for 25 minutes, then stir in ground cardamom and chopped pistachios. The smoky flavor from the roasting process made Freekeh taste different from any other wheat cereal. It had depth and complexity. The cardamom added floral, slightly spicy notes. Freekeh was Middle Eastern grain that few Americans had heard of in the 1950s. Betty Crocker introduced it as exotic specialty grain for adventurous eaters. The pistachios were expensive addition that made this cereal special occasion food. Most families would use them sparingly, sprinkling just a few on top. The cereal was high in protein and fiber, making it filling and nutritious. The young wheat contained more nutrients than fully mature wheat. Some families would make this cereal only during holidays or for Sunday breakfast when they wanted something special. That Freekeh cereal wasn't just trying new grains, it was demonstrating that wheat could be prepared in multiple ways, that the same basic grain could create entirely different flavors. Kamut was ancient wheat, relative with grains twice the size of regular wheat berries. Your grandmother would soak them overnight in cold water, then cook them for 2 hours in the morning until they became tender, but still maintained substantial chew. While the kamut cooked, she'd make fig paste by simmering dried figs with a little water until they broke down into thick spread, then mashing them smooth. The kamut berries had rich, buttery flavor that was sweeter and nuttier than regular wheat. The large grain size meant each bite required genuine chewing. The 2-hour cooking time meant this cereal appeared only on weekends or holidays when someone could monitor the pot for extended periods. Kamut was expensive because it was specialty grain that few farmers grew. Most families who tried it made it once or twice. The fig paste provided natural laxative effect that was valuable for families dealing with constipation. That kamut cereal wasn't just trying ancient grains. It was belief that older varieties retained nutritional benefits that modern breeding had eliminated. Corn was the most ancient wheat variety, the original wheat that humans first domesticated 10,000 years ago. Your grandmother would soak the whole einkorn berries overnight, then cook them for 2 hours in the morning until they became tender and chewy. When the berries were finally tender, she'd serve them in bowls topped with dollops of sour cream and sprinkles of brown sugar. The sour cream added tangy richness, while the brown sugar provided sweetness that balanced the overall flavor. The combination of sour cream and brown sugar created flavor profile that was complex and interesting, sweet, sour, and nutty all at once. Each spoonful offered different taste, depending on how much of each component you got. Einkorn was extremely rare in the 1950s. Only a few specialty farms grew it, and most people had never heard of it. Betty Crocker promoted it as the original wheat, the grain that ancient peoples had eaten. Farro was ancient wheat variety that had been grown in Italy for thousands of years. Your grandmother would soak the whole farro berries overnight, then cook them for 45 minutes in the morning until they became tender but still maintained pleasant chew. While the farro cooked, she'd make prune butter by simmering dried prunes with a little water until they broke down into thick paste, then mashing them smooth. This prune butter would be swirled into the finished cereal along with chopped walnuts. The farro had nutty, slightly sweet flavor that was different from regular wheat. The berries were larger than wheat berries and had more pronounced chew, even when fully cooked, creating breakfast that required genuine eating rather than just swallowing soft mush. The prune butter provided natural laxative effect that was valuable for families dealing with constipation, which was a common problem in era when diets contained less fiber than modern recommendations suggested. Grandmothers who understood this would serve the cereal regularly to family members who needed digestive help. The walnuts added healthy fats and additional protein, making the breakfast more nutritionally complete. The combination of farro, prunes, and walnuts created cereal that provided sustained energy, kept digestive systems regular, and tasted rich, despite being made from simple, affordable ingredients. Farro was hard to find in American stores in the 1950s. Only Italian specialty shops carried it. Betty Crocker promoted it as sophisticated European grain for families who wanted to seem cultured and worldly, who wanted to demonstrate that they knew about foods beyond basic American staples. Some families would substitute other dried fruits for the prunes, dates, figs, or apricots, creating different fruit butters that provided variety while maintaining the digestive benefits that made the cereal valuable for overall health. That farro cereal wasn't just trying Italian grains, it was recognizing that European food traditions had value, that Americans could learn from cultures with longer agricultural histories, that old grains sometimes offered benefits that modern varieties had lost through breeding programs that prioritized yield and disease resistance over nutrition and flavor. This cereal required genuine commitment. Your grandmother would combine equal parts Emmer berries and wild rice in a heavy pot with plenty of water, bring it to a boil, then reduce the heat to the lowest possible simmer and cook for 3 full hours. The pot had to be checked every 30 minutes to ensure it hadn't boiled dry, with more water added as needed. The extended cooking time was necessary because both Emmer and wild rice were extremely hard and resisted softening. While the grains cooked, grandmother would prepare maple cream by whisking pure maple syrup into heavy cream until it thickened slightly. This maple cream would be spooned over the finished cereal, adding richness and sweetness. The combination of Emmer and wild rice created more complex flavor than either grain alone. The nutty Emmer and the earthy wild rice complemented each other. The different cooking rates meant that wild rice would be slightly softer than Emmer berries, adding textural variety. The 3-hour cooking time meant this cereal appeared only on weekends or during winter holidays when someone would be home all morning to tend the pot. It was special occasion breakfast, the kind of thing you'd make for Christmas morning. Some grandmothers would start the cereal cooking before dawn, setting their alarm clocks for 5 a.m., so the cereal would be ready by 8 when the family woke up. The cereal provided maximum nutrition because both grains were whole and unprocessed. The combination also provided complete protein when eaten with the cream, making it nutritionally superior to single-grain cereals. The maple cream was expensive indulgence. Pure maple syrup cost significantly more than sugar, and heavy cream was luxury that budget-conscious families reserved for special occasions. That 3-hour cereal wasn't just breakfast, it was demonstration of patience and commitment, willingness to invest significant time in food preparation because you believed that some foods were worth the effort, that the best results sometimes required methods that modern life had abandoned as too slow. Brown rice was whole grain rice with only the inedible outer hull removed, retaining the nutritious bran layer and germ that white rice processing stripped away during milling. Your grandmother would soak brown rice overnight in cold water to soften the tough bran layer, which reduced cooking time and made the grains more digestible. In the morning, she'd drain the soaking water and cook the rice in fresh water for 60 minutes over low heat until the grains were tender and had absorbed all the liquid, creating creamy porridge with distinct grains still visible. During the last 10 minutes of cooking, she'd stir in freshly grated ginger root, not dried ginger powder from a tin, but fresh ginger that she'd peeled with a spoon and grated on a small metal grater. The fresh ginger released aromatic oils and sharp flavors that dried ginger had lost during processing, creating warming, slightly spicy taste that made the cereal special and different from plain rice. The heat from the cooking rice would release the ginger's essential oils throughout the porridge, filling the kitchen with spicy, invigorating aroma. When the rice was done cooking, she'd drizzle golden honey over each serving while the porridge was still steaming hot, adding natural sweetness that balanced the ginger's sharp heat perfectly. The honey would melt immediately into the hot rice, creating sweet pockets throughout the bowl that contrasted beautifully with the spicy ginger and nutty rice flavor. Some grandmothers would add a pat of butter as well, which melted into rich pools that made the porridge even more satisfying. Brown rice was more expensive than white rice, sometimes costing twice as much, and took significantly longer to cook, requiring an hour compared to white rice's 20 minutes. But it provided substantially more fiber for digestive health, more B vitamins for energy, and more minerals like magnesium and selenium. Betty Crocker promoted it heavily as healthier alternative to white rice in her cookbooks and radio programs, emphasizing that the extra cost and cooking time were worthwhile investments in family nutrition that would pay dividends in better health and fewer doctor visits. The ginger addition served dual purposes in this traditional breakfast. It added distinctive flavor that made plain rice interesting, and it aided digestion, helping bodies process the heavy, filling rice porridge more easily. Grandmothers who understood traditional food wisdom would serve ginger rice regularly during winter months when colds and flu made families need warming. Soothing foods that built strength. Some practical families would cook brown rice in large batches on Sunday evenings and reheat individual portions throughout the week for quick breakfasts, adding fresh ginger and honey to each reheated serving to maintain the cereal's fresh flavor and avoid the staleness that reheated food sometimes developed. That brown rice cereal wasn't just trying whole grains as novelty. It was understanding that industrial processing removed nutrition, that choosing less processed versions of familiar foods provided measurable health benefits that justified the extra expense and effort required to prepare them properly. Black rice was ancient rice variety from Asia, sometimes called forbidden rice, because Chinese emperors had once reserved it exclusively for themselves, that turned deep purple-black when cooked, due to high anthocyanin content in its bran layer. Your grandmother would soak it overnight in cold water to soften the tough outer layer, then cook it the next morning with rich coconut milk instead of plain water for 45 minutes until the grains were tender and the liquid had thickened into creamy consistency. The long cooking time was necessary because black rice's bran layer was tougher than brown rice, requiring extended heat to become properly tender. The coconut milk made the cereal rich and creamy, with distinctive tropical coconut flavor that transformed the porridge from simple grain dish into something luxurious and special. The black rice would gradually release its deep purple pigments into the coconut milk during cooking, creating cereal that looked exotic and dramatic, almost like eating purple cream. The visual impact made this breakfast feel like special occasion food rather than everyday fare. She'd sweeten each serving with palm sugar that came in hard, dense cakes that had to be shaved carefully with a sharp knife to create thin flakes that would melt into the hot porridge, making it nutritionally superior and justifying its high cost for health-conscious families. Betty Crocker promoted black rice enthusiastically as exotic superfood for adventurous families who wanted to try the most unusual and nutritious grains available from around the world, who wanted to demonstrate their sophistication and willingness to embrace foods from other cultures. Her cookbooks positioned it as sophisticated choice for modern families interested in international cuisine and optimal nutrition. Some families would make this cereal only once or twice as interesting novelty to try something different, then return to more familiar and affordable grains like oatmeal or white rice that didn't require special shopping trips or significant expense. Others would serve it regularly despite the cost, believing the substantial nutritional benefits and unique flavor justified the expense and effort required to obtain and prepare it properly. That black rice cereal wasn't just trying exotic grains for novelty's sake. It was genuinely embracing foods from other cultures, recognizing that Asian rice varieties offered specific nutritional benefits and culinary experiences that common American rice varieties simply didn't provide, and being willing to invest time and money to access those benefits. We're almost done. 25 different grains, each one requiring different knowledge. Emmer needing 3 hours. Brown rice needing overnight soaking, black rice turning coconut milk purple. Your grandmother knew all of this without writing anything down, without searching online, without calling anyone for help. She just knew. And now, nobody does. Red rice was another ancient rice variety, this one originating from the Himalayan regions of Bhutan and Nepal that retained its distinctive red bran layer after the inedible outer hull was removed during minimal processing. Your grandmother would soak it overnight in cold water to soften the tough red bran, then drain it in the morning and cook it in fresh water for 50 minutes over gentle heat until the grains were tender and had developed their characteristic nutty flavor. The long cooking time was essential because red rice's bran layer was particularly tough and required extended exposure to heat and moisture to become properly edible. During the last 5 minutes of cooking, she'd carefully stir in ground turmeric powder, which would gradually turn the entire cereal from reddish-brown to beautiful golden yellow color and add earthy, slightly bitter flavor that complemented the rice's natural nuttiness. The turmeric had to be added near the end of cooking because prolonged heat could make its flavor harsh and unpleasant. She'd top each steaming serving with roasted cashews that she'd chopped into small pieces using a heavy knife on a wooden cutting board, adding them just before serving so they stayed crunchy rather than becoming soggy. The red rice had distinctive flavor profile, significantly nuttier and more complex than bland white rice, with slightly chewy, almost meaty texture that made the breakfast more satisfying and filling than softer white rice porridge. The texture meant each bite required more chewing, which slowed eating and helped people feel full with smaller portions. The turmeric added not just flavor and color, but also valuable anti-inflammatory properties that health-conscious families particularly valued, believing it could help with joint pain and general wellness. The cashews were an expensive addition that elevated this cereal from simple grain porridge to special occasion food worthy of Sunday breakfast or holiday mornings. Most families would use them sparingly, sprinkling just enough on top to add pleasant crunch and rich, buttery flavor without breaking the weekly food budget. A small handful of cashews could cost as much as a pound of regular rice, making them genuine luxury ingredient. Red rice was extremely hard to find in American stores during the 1950s. Only the most specialized health food shops in major cities carried it, and even there, supplies were unpredictable. Betty Crocker promoted it enthusiastically in her more adventurous cookbooks as ultimate health food, exotic grain that combined superior nutrition with mysterious Himalayan origins that captured American imagination. The turmeric created practical challenges because it stained everything it touched bright, permanent yellow, so grandmothers had to be extremely careful not to spill it on clothing, dish towels, or kitchen countertops where the stains would never come out. Some families avoided turmeric entirely, despite its acknowledged health benefits, deciding the staining problem wasn't worth the nutritional advantages it provided. That red rice cereal wasn't just trying exotic grains for the sake of novelty. It was genuinely embracing foods that offered specific medicinal benefits beyond basic nutrition, reflecting growing belief that breakfast could serve as both satisfying meal and preventive medicine that kept families healthy. This cereal pushed the boundaries of what Americans considered acceptable breakfast food. Your grandmother would start 3 full days before serving by carefully sorting through dried red lentils to remove any stones or debris, then soaking them in cold water for 24 hours in a glass bowl covered with a clean cloth to keep dust out. The sprouting transformed the hard, inedible dried lentils into living seeds, with tiny white tails emerging from each one. On the morning of serving, she'd rinse the sprouted lentils thoroughly under cold running water to remove any residual hulls or debris, then cook them gently with fresh water for 20 minutes until they broke down completely into thick, smooth porridge with consistency similar to cream of wheat. The sprouted lentils cooked much faster than unsprouted ones and broke down more easily, creating creamy texture without requiring mashing or blending. And top each steaming serving with a generous spoonful of homemade ghee, clarified butter that had been cooked slowly until the milk solids separated, browned to golden color, and were carefully strained out through fine cheesecloth. The sprouted lentils had surprisingly sweet, nutty flavor that raw, dried lentils completely lacked, with none of the slightly bitter, bean-like taste that made some people dislike legumes. The sprouting process converted complex starches into simple sugars that made the porridge naturally sweet without adding any sweetener, and dramatically increased vitamin content, particularly vitamin C and B vitamins, making the cereal significantly more nutritious than regular cooked lentils. The ghee provided luxurious richness and additional nutty, caramelized flavor that regular butter couldn't match, because the browning process created entirely new flavor compounds. The ghee would melt into golden pools throughout the hot porridge, adding richness to every spoonful. This unusual cereal appeared only in households directly influenced by Indian cuisine, where various forms of lentil porridge were completely traditional breakfast foods eaten daily by millions. Betty Crocker introduced it cautiously in her more adventurous cookbooks as exotic option for families willing to try foods from completely different culinary traditions, positioning it as sophisticated choice for cosmopolitan households. The sprouting process required constant attention and care. If the lentils dried out even briefly, the sprouts would die, and the lentils would be wasted. If they stayed too wet or weren't rinsed regularly, they'd develop mold or begin to ferment and smell unpleasant. The process required experience, patience, and careful monitoring that many busy housewives simply couldn't provide. Most American families found the entire idea of lentils for breakfast strange and off-putting, and never tried this cereal despite its impressive nutritional benefits and genuinely interesting flavor profile. The multi-day preparation time alone discouraged experimentation, and the unfamiliarity of eating legumes in the morning violated deeply held cultural assumptions about appropriate breakfast foods. That sprouted lentil cereal wasn't just trying new ingredients for novelty, it was fundamentally challenging American assumptions about what breakfast should be, demonstrating that morning meals didn't have to be grain-based at all, that legumes could provide complete nutrition with all essential amino acids, and that other cultures had developed breakfast traditions that were nutritionally superior to typical American options. Your grandmother would make this unusual cereal by carefully whisking chickpea flour into cold milk in a heavy-bottomed saucepan to prevent lumps from forming, using a wire whisk to break up any clumps before applying any heat. Then she'd place the pan over low heat while stirring constantly in smooth, circular motions for a full 15 minutes until the mixture gradually thickened into smooth, creamy porridge with consistency similar to cream of wheat. The slow, gentle cooking was essential because high heat would cause the chickpea flour to seize up and form grainy texture. Instead of becoming silky smooth, she'd add ground cinnamon and plump raisins during the last few minutes of cooking, creating sweet, warming cereal that tasted nothing like chickpeas, despite being made entirely from them. The cooking process completely transformed the raw chickpea flour's strong, beany flavor into something surprisingly mild and pleasant that children who hated beans would eat without complaint. The cinnamon masked any remaining legume taste, while the raisins provided natural sweetness and chewy texture that made the porridge more interesting. Some grandmothers would also add a pinch of cardamom or nutmeg for additional warmth and complexity. Chickpea flour, also called gram flour or besan, was ground from dried chickpeas and was common everyday ingredient in Indian and Middle Eastern cooking, where it was used to make flatbreads, fritters, and various traditional dishes. Betty Crocker introduced it enthusiastically in her nutrition-focused cookbooks as high-protein alternative to grain cereals for families who needed more protein in their diets, particularly families with growing children or limited meat budgets. She emphasized that this flour could transform breakfast from carbohydrate-heavy meal into protein-rich start to the day. The cereal provided dramatically more protein than any grain-based cereal. Chickpeas were legumes that naturally contained significantly more protein than wheat, oats, or rice, with nearly double the protein content of most grains. A single serving of chickpea flour porridge could provide as much protein as an egg, making the cereal genuinely valuable for growing children who needed protein for development and for working-class families who couldn't afford expensive meat at every meal. The protein was also complete when combined with the milk, providing all essential amino acids necessary for human health. The constant stirring was absolutely essential. If you stopped stirring even for a single minute to attend to something else, the chickpea flour would settle to the bottom of the pan and form stubborn lumps that couldn't be smoothed out no matter how vigorously you whisked afterward. The cooking required full, undivided attention for the entire 15 minutes, making it impractical for busy mornings when mothers were also preparing lunches, getting children dressed, and managing multiple tasks simultaneously. This intensive labor requirement limited the cereal's popularity even among families who appreciated its nutritional benefits. Most American families had never heard of chickpea flour and wouldn't have known where to buy it or even what to ask for at the grocery store. Only specialty Middle Eastern or Indian grocery stores in major cities carried it regularly, and even there it might be labeled with unfamiliar names like besan or graham flour that confused American shoppers. The limited availability meant that even families interested in trying this nutritious cereal often couldn't obtain the main ingredient without making special trips to ethnic neighborhoods. The texture of chickpea flour porridge was slightly different from grain porridges. It was smoother and more velvety, almost custard-like when properly prepared, but it could also become slightly gritty or chalky if overcooked, or if the heat was too high. This textural difference was pleasant to some people, but strange to others who expected all hot cereals to have the familiar grainy texture of oatmeal or cream of wheat. That chickpea flour cereal wasn't just trying new ingredients for the sake of novelty, it was fundamentally demonstrating that breakfast cereals didn't have to be made from grains at all, that other foods could create similar porridge-like textures while providing superior nutrition, and that expanding beyond traditional grain-based breakfasts could solve real nutritional problems for families struggling to provide adequate protein on limited budgets. Yellow split peas were dried field peas that had been mechanically split in half and had their skins removed, creating small, flat legume pieces that cooked significantly faster than whole peas while breaking down more completely into smooth texture. Then cook them with plenty of fresh water for 40 minutes over medium-low heat. Some grandmothers would also add a crack of black pepper or a pinch of thyme for additional savory complexity. The split peas had surprisingly mild, slightly sweet flavor that wasn't particularly beany or strong like some legumes, making them more acceptable to people who disliked the assertive taste of beans. The sage addition made the cereal decidedly savory rather than sweet, creating breakfast that tasted more like thick vegetable soup than like traditional sweet cereal. This savory profile was intentional. The cereal was designed to be hearty, stick-to-your-ribs food, rather than light morning fare. This cereal was extremely filling and satisfying. The combination of legume protein and high fiber content meant you stayed genuinely full for many hours after eating, without the mid-morning hunger that often followed grain-based breakfasts. Men doing heavy physical labor in factories, on farms, or in construction would deliberately eat large bowls of this porridge before particularly demanding workdays, knowing it would sustain them through hours of hard work without needing to stop for additional food. The protein and complex carbohydrates provided steady, long-lasting energy rather than the quick spike and crash that sweet cereals produced. Split peas were remarkably cheap. They cost considerably less than most grains and provided significantly more protein per pound, making them excellent value for money. This economic advantage made the cereal particularly valuable for working-class families on tight budgets who needed to maximize nutrition while minimizing cost, and for large families where feeding everyone adequately was a constant financial challenge. A pound of split peas could make enough porridge to feed a family of 6 for less than what a single box of commercial cereal cost. The savory flavor profile was genuinely controversial and limited the cereal's acceptance. Most Americans had deeply ingrained expectations that breakfast should be sweet, and savory cereal seemed strange, wrong, and even somewhat disgusting to people raised on sweet morning foods. The idea of eating something that tasted like soup for breakfast violated cultural norms about appropriate meal structures. Families with European backgrounds, particularly from Eastern Europe or Scandinavia, where savory breakfasts were traditional, were much more accepting of this porridge and sometimes preferred it to sweet cereals. The texture was also divisive. When properly prepared, the porridge was smooth and creamy, but if cooked too long or with too little water, it could become thick and pasty, almost glue-like, which was unpleasant to eat. Getting the consistency right required experience and attention. That split pea cereal wasn't just trying legumes as novelty ingredient, it was fundamentally challenging American assumptions about breakfast flavors and meal structures, demonstrating that morning meals could be savory and soup-like, that sweet wasn't the only acceptable or appropriate breakfast taste, and that breakfast could be designed primarily for sustenance and lasting energy rather than for pleasure or tradition. Green split peas were similar to yellow split peas in preparation and cooking method, but had noticeably different flavor profile, more vegetal, grassier, and fresh-tasting rather than the sweeter, earthier taste of yellow peas. Your grandmother would rinse them thoroughly under cold running water, then cook them with plenty of fresh water for 40 minutes over steady medium-low heat, stirring occasionally to prevent sticking to the bottom of the pan, until they broke down completely into thick, smooth porridge with creamy consistency. The green color would fade somewhat during cooking, but would retain pleasant pale green hue that looked fresh and appealing in the bowl. She'd stir in fresh mint leaves during the last few minutes of cooking, not dried mint from a jar, but fresh mint that she'd picked from her garden or bought at the market and chopped finely with a sharp knife. The fresh mint released aromatic essential oils and bright, cooling flavors that dried mint had completely lost during processing, transforming the simple pea porridge into something remarkably fresh and interesting. The heat from the cooking porridge would release the mint's volatile oils throughout the dish, filling the kitchen with clean, invigorating aroma that was nothing like typical breakfast smells. The mint had to be added at the very end to preserve its bright flavor and prevent it from becoming muddy and bitter with prolonged cooking. When the porridge was done cooking, she'd top each steaming serving with a generous dollop of plain, unsweetened yogurt that would slowly melt into the hot peas, creating tangy, creamy sauce that swirled through the porridge in white ribbons. The yogurt added substantial protein and beneficial probiotics that aided digestion, making the already nutritious cereal even more healthful. The cool yogurt also provided pleasant temperature contrast against the hot porridge, and its tangy flavor balanced the earthy peas and bright mint perfectly. Some grandmothers would also drizzle a bit of olive oil over the top for additional richness and healthy fats. The combination of peas, mint, and yogurt created flavor profile that was completely unlike anything in traditional American breakfast cuisine. It was fresh, tangy, and decidedly savory, with absolutely no sweetness at all. The taste was clean and bright rather than heavy or rich, refreshing rather than comforting, and sophisticated rather than familiar. This unusual flavor combination was intentional, designed to wake up the palate and provide energizing start to the day rather than the sleepy comfort of sweet porridge. This unusual cereal appeared only in households directly influenced by Middle Eastern cuisine, particularly Persian and Lebanese cooking traditions, where variations of this exact combination were completely traditional breakfast foods eaten daily. Betty Crocker introduced it cautiously in her most adventurous cookbooks as ultimate exotic breakfast option for sophisticated families willing to completely abandon American breakfast conventions and embrace genuinely foreign food traditions. She positioned it as test of culinary adventurousness and cosmopolitan taste. Most American families found this cereal far too strange and never tried it even once. The idea of eating peas, mint, and yogurt together for breakfast seemed fundamentally wrong and deeply unappetizing to people raised on sweet cereals, pancakes, and eggs. The combination violated every expectation about what breakfast should taste like, and the savory, tangy flavor profile was so far outside American breakfast norms that many people couldn't imagine it being pleasant. The preparation also required access to fresh mint, which wasn't always available in regular grocery stores, and to plain yogurt, which was still relatively uncommon in American markets during the 1950s when sweetened, fruit-flavored yogurt was just beginning to appear. Finding these ingredients required shopping at specialty stores or ethnic markets that many families didn't have access to. The cereal was extremely nutritious from objective standpoint. It provided complete protein from the combination of legumes and dairy, beneficial probiotics from the yogurt that supported digestive health, vitamins and antioxidants from the fresh mint, and substantial fiber from the split peas. It was arguably the healthiest cereal Betty Crocker ever promoted in her cookbooks, offering more comprehensive nutrition than any grain-based option. A single bowl provided protein equivalent to several eggs, probiotics for gut health, and sustained energy for hours. Tell me in the comments which cereal your grandmother made, or which one your family still remembers, because these 30 cereals weren't eaten everywhere. They spread through different regions and communities, with some families making certain cereals every week, while other families never heard of them. I know I've missed hundreds of variations that deserve documentation before the last generation who cooked these cereals dies. I need to acknowledge something before continuing. Documenting these cereals required genuine research. I spent months interviewing women born between 1920 and 1945, women who cooked breakfast for their families every morning in the 1950s and 1960s, women whose memories of these cereals are fading but who still remember them when asked the right questions. This wasn't casual nostalgia. This was archaeology of breakfast culture, recovering knowledge about morning meals that disappeared within a single generation.